Recep gave me a story from the book of Mary, the story of Mary. Now, how many here know the story from Christmas that Mary had Jesus? How many know that story? Okay, good. So this is a different story, but the same result. Jesus, the great prophet. So Mary stayed by herself a lot. She liked to pray and think about God and think how she could be a better person. She stayed by herself. And one day, a perfect person came to her and said, "No, I'm actually not a person. I am a messenger from God. You're going to have a baby." She said, "That's impossible. I'm here all by myself. I can't have." Yes, God can do anything. You are going to, in fact, have a baby. It is ordained. It has already been told. It is what's going to happen, and it's because you're so pure in heart and loving God. So, actually, she did find that there was a baby growing in her tummy. Now, I want to ask, how many of you were born in a hospital? If you were born in a hospital. How many of you were born at home with helpers? Our European there. And how many of you had a mother who had a child without any helpers at all by herself? Nobody raises their hand. I wonder why that is. We don't normally have a baby all alone. It's great to have help. Well, Mary, because she stayed alone, she went to a distant place by herself while the baby grew inside her, and she was very discouraged because she didn't want a baby. She was still not reconciled, used to the idea that she was going to have a baby. And said, "Do not grieve," a voice said to her. "Your Lord has set..." I left something out here because she's all alone out there. She is about to have a baby. She's hungry, and she's thirsty, and she's alone. So she went in her pain to a palm tree. You know, they're kind of bumpy on the sides, but this is a smoother one, and she went to it, and she's holding on, and she's having labor pains. She's going to have a baby, and she cries out, "This is terrible. I don't know what to do." And a voice said, "Do not grieve. Your Lord has set a little river at your feet. And you can shake the trunk of the tree. It's a date palm." And so what fell down all around her? Dates. How many here have eaten a date? They're wonderful. They're sweet, and they're filled with energy calories. So you can eat and drink, and you will be comforted while you are here. If you should see any person say, how could you say, "I'm not talking to anybody right now"? How can you say, "I have a vow of silence"? If they come to you and I say, "I want to talk with you," what would you say? So she stayed silent. And she delivered this baby. The baby, she was so happy as soon as she had this baby. It was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm in love with this child. I love this child," which is a feeling mothers often feel with a baby that just is all out now. So then she went back to her village, and people came up to her and said, "You went out into the distant place, and you're coming back with a child. What happened? What really happened?" And she said, "Don't worry, I have been a good person, but ask this child." Well, has anyone ever talked to a child that's tiny like this? Well, I think I talk to them all the time, but do they talk back? In fact, Jesus said these words from the Quran, "Surely I am a servant of God. He has already decreed that he will give me the gospel and make me a prophet. He has made me blessed, and as a means of his blessing for all the people, wherever I may be, and he has enjoined upon me the prayer and the prescribed purifying alms for as long as I live. And he has made me dutiful, responsible, loving, dutiful to my mother. And he has not made me unruly or wicked. So peace be upon me on this day I was born, and the day of my death, and the day when I will be raised to life. So speaks from the Book of Mary in the Quran. Recep spent his middle years and then through college as a Islamic study of Islamic philosophy, Islamic ways. He has his doctorate, which would we consider a divinity in Islamic studies. He also works in cybersecurity. I'll just, here we are in the Bay Area. I wanted to emphasize something that I have been learning, and it's taken a few years, starting with a book I read a while ago called If the Oceans Were Ink, which is a Jewish woman, meticulous but not particularly religious, coming from a secular household, who studied with a sheikh, whose name escaped me, Sheikh Mohammed, that is renowned, but she studied with him for a year, which was a gift he gave her. He was conservative, and yet they discussed many problems that have to do with her life, the life of the people around her, and I found it fascinating that it all wasn't set in stone. It was more like, being an Islamic scholar, of looking at it and thinking what the situation is today, and how does all of that history and all of that knowledge bear on the question here. So it's a slow-moving change of pace sometimes. But Dr. Dogan has moved into a place of tolerance and peace, which is where your mentor was, and has been part of our multi-faith coalition. So he brings so much to that organization and here to us today. I found a book called In Children of the Same God, Susan Ritchie, and she makes a fairly groundbreaking historical argument that long before Unitarianism and Universalism merged in the United States, Unitarianism itself was inherently multi-religious. She demonstrates how Unitarians in Eastern Europe claimed a strong affinity with Jews and Muslims from the very beginning, and how mutual theological underpinnings and active cooperation underpin Unitarian history. Here's an excerpt from her book. I would like to think that our deliberate Unitarian engagement with Judaism and Islam in Europe might come to serve as a lived example of our own Andalusia, a remembrance, hope of what riches are possible when we embrace multi-religious engagement. Ibn Arabi, the theologian most influential on the religious expression of the Ottoman Empire, later expressed through the poetry of Rumi, described one of the realms of spiritual ascensions as the imaginal. The imaginable is a place where things are absolutely real and completely true, even though they are perceived not through the senses, but through the imagination. I like to think of Unitarian multi-religious engagement and enmeshment as our imaginal. It has been variously imperfect and all too brief incarnations in our movement, but it nonetheless lies very close to the heart of our experience. And it waits, I believe, for us to overtly champion it again. Could it be that toleration, that most precious inheritance of the European Enlightenment, was instead a shared liberal Christian Muslim undertaking? It is especially ironic that while we praise the progressive diversity promoting character of our earliest Unitarian statements of religious tolerance, we have also defined them heartily as products of liberal European genius. It is well past time to live out the paradigm of shared understanding that we had already heralded from Eastern Europe. As we have seen, European Unitarianism was formed in large part in a desire to honor Christianity's close kinship with Judaism and Islam. Convinced that Christians, Muslims, and Jews were part of the same religious family, Unitarians emerged as those liberal Christians who resisted theologies of God that could not be freely shared across traditions. Eventually, this impulse became more than an abstract theology as Unitarians sought to establish actual relationships with their Jewish and Islamic kin. That is dense, yes, but it absolutely took me into the feeling, the roots of our history, that we came out of a cooperation with the Christian background, the Jews, and the Islam. That was our foundation.
Once again, I am with you. So this time, my speech, why I am engaged with interfaith activities, interfaith dialogue. So from my personal experience, I'll share my story and give some, basis for this approach. First, I'll start with my education, my background, and how, for the first time, I was introduced to or interact with Christians, Jews, and after that, I give you some foundations. Where is it coming from? Why interfaith is important? Is there any basis in the primary sources of Islam, which is Quran and the words of the Prophet Muhammad? And then I will emphasize on primary values. In the last, I will talk about Jesus coming to this world for the second time. Muslims, they believe Jesus will come back to set the things right. So I'll talk about that and conclude my speech. First of all, I grew up in a small village, small town, and I went middle high school. It's kind of divinity school, not university, but divinity school. I learned all the Islamic disciplines, subjects, religious education, simply. And after that, I went to university. I graduated from divinity school. So again, it's Islamic studies, Islamic subjects. And later, I finished my master's and PhD in Islamic studies, theology, Islamic theology. During all this time, I never heard that as Muslims, we should interact with people from other faiths. We should get to know them, although it is strongly emphasized, as you noticed in the reading part, right, directly from the Quran. For the first time in my life, after finishing the university, the scholar, whose name is Fethullah Gülen, there was a quote from him at the beginning of sermon, is mentioning about love, how it's seed, start as a seed. So he encouraged people, first, let's come together, whether which political view or religious background or denomination, doesn't matter, let's come together and talk and promote what is common and try to get to understand each other. So he initiated the activities in Turkey first. And then he expanded this engagement or dialogue activities with people from other faiths. For the first time, he met with Pope in Italy, Rome, right? A lot of Muslims, rigid-minded Muslims, they accuse him as betraying Islamic values. How is it possible a Muslim scholar, religious leader, go to Italy and meet with Pope and shake his hand? It's unheard thing. But as if we learn the Quran for the first time, so he introduced a lot of parts from the Quran, as well as from the life of Prophet Muhammad, that he indeed, Quran, then the Prophet Muhammad, engaged in interfaith dialogue. Many evidences. And he also emphasized that this is the only way to bring true peace in this world. We have to come together. As Muslims, it's our duty to introduce ourselves to people, to Christians, Jews, or any other faith tradition. Otherwise, too much prejudice, people would have bias, we have to do something. We should initiate. So it was kind of very important moment in my life. What happened when I moved to United States? For the first time, I heard there was an activity. 10 Muslims, 10 Jewish, 10 Christian clergy or religious scholars or pastors or whatever, imams, they're coming together to discuss, it's very interesting, most critical or sensitive texts in their holy books, in Bible or Torah or Quran. It's very interesting. So for me, I had some negative thoughts, like how is it possible to come together and staying 1 week in same area and interacting all the time with Christians, Jews. I didn't know what will happen. But before going into detail what we did during those weeks, when we separate from each other after 1 week, some of us cried because we, established, built such love, such friendship, strong ties that it was not easy to, separate, to say goodbye. I never expect such thing would happen. During those 1 week, we discussed different parts from the Torah, Quran, Bible. Sometimes people, they felt very emotional because very sensitive, passages were selected. At the end, we visited, mosque, synagogue, church, and I thought this is wonderful. Wonderful. Give a chance to other people or just listen to them what they say without having any, prejudice. The second thing, this is for me more interesting because it's usually this is my experience, maybe you have different experience. I never thought that I would go to synagogue and study Quran with rabbis. I never ever, even imagined such thing. But I have a very good friend, Rabbi Alan Meller. He invited me to the synagogue in LA. So for a long time, we came together with rabbis, few imams, and studied some parts, some passages, some chapters in the Quran mentioning the story of Moses. Moses, by the way, the prophet Moses is the one, his name is mentioned most in the Quran, more than 100 times. So he's a very common figure in the Quran. So now I'll talk about why we need interfaith. First of all, establishing theological foundation connects you to an act that, okay, this is coming from my religion, I have to do this. This is not something I do, out of religion. No, indeed, the religion itself, the book, the primary sources encourage you. The second thing, the reality. Too much hatred enmity, war, right, between, unfortunately, the followers of three major religions, or Islam, right, Judaism, Christianity. It's so interesting, especially when we look at the history. Too much, evil or bad events, really. So the first step to initiate interfaith dialogue is forget what happened in the past. You can't change it, but we can change now and the future. So I'll mention few verses from the Quran and then from the life of Prophet Muhammad. First verse, Quran says, Ya ayyuhan nas, O humankind, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. We created you as male and female. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ. We divided you into nations, tribes, or different cultures. لِتَعَارَفُوا. Why? What was the purpose? Why too many races or cultures, languages, religions, whatever? To get to know each other. This is divine will, divine destiny. You didn't choose your own, right, family or the country or race or whatever, even religion. Just found yourself into it. And the second verse, if God willed, He would create you as one nation, one language, one religion, but He didn't. And He's asking to raise in virtues, in good deeds. Present your, best ability in virtues or good deeds. The last verse from the Quran, Ya Ahl al-Kitab, God mentioning the follower of Holy Book, Christians, mainly Christians and Jewish. Ya Ahl al-Kitab, O people of book, who has divine book, divine origin. Ta'ala bila kalimatin sawa'in baynana wa baynakum. Let's come together around one word. It's equal between us. Believing in one God, at least we have something that we can agree and come together and try to understand each other. Instead of fighting, instead of hating each other, let's come together. God invites. So what happened after receiving this verse? Many Christians in the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, visited him in his mosque, holy mosque, right? And he opened the door as you did today to me. So he invited me. I'm very grateful. You gave me such opportunity to explain my belief. It's such a wonderful thing. So Prophet Muhammad opened the masjid or temple in your world. And maybe 70 priests, clergy, pastors, or religious men, they came, stayed in the masjid, in the temple for maybe 1 week or 10 days. During those times, they had debate with the Prophet. They asked their questions. Occasionally, they didn't agree with the Prophet. But what happened? They made some agreement. No one will attack or fight other person. We live in peaceful environment, peaceful manner. Another example from his life, this happened in the early stage of prophethood. The Muslims, as it was the case for Christians, right? In the early Christians, they were persecuted, they were killed, and many bad things, they were tortured. It's the same thing, Muslims, in the early stage of Islam, they were persecuted so badly. That some weak people, they were not able to, endure. And the Prophet Muhammad suggests them, they can immigrate to such country which was governed by Christian king. Not anywhere else. The Prophet asked them, go to the place which is governed by the Christian king. He's just. He never let you, be oppressed there. Or even if some people from Mecca, they go chase after them and ask them to be given those, people. But so it happened as soon as they left Mecca, the city of Islam. Islam was born in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia today. They went to Ethiopia, which was governed by, the Najashi, the king. And Meccan leaders went there, asked the king, even they gave the king some, gifts, very expensive gifts, and asked him, can you surrender those, people who flee from Mecca? They are as if they are slaves, and asking Meccan leader, asking them to be returned. The king listened both sides. In that moment, one of the Muslims, he recited verses from the Quran you can read. It's about, indeed, Jeanne shared, it's about the Mary. When the king listened what Quran says, because for the first time he was listening, he said there is no difference between Christianity and Islam like this, line. It's very similar. And he also talked to Meccan leaders, I never let you take these people. They are under my protection. They can live how much, however, or how long they want in peaceful manner, or I never let them go. So here, a lot of examples. The Prophet himself, he visited Christian peoples whenever they invited, accepted their gifts. Also, he gave them gifts or invited them to the mosque or home, shared food. As an example, always, show them respect. And even once there was a funeral, passing by, right? He stood up. And some Muslims said, oh, Prophet, he's not Muslim, but he's human being. All human beings need to be respected, need to be loved. So that's why I stood up. Now, I'll focus on primary values and finish with how Islam sees, perceives Jesus coming for the second time. Primary values, love, right? Love is the strongest tie that connects people together. Because of God's love, there is creation. He created everything out of his love. And love connects everything together. Love is the, shortest way to reach God, to be connected to him, to be exalted spiritually. Also, other things, mercy, right, compassion, justice, there are many primary values. Now, why in the Quran, and also there are many prophetic sayings, words of Prophet Muhammad, he gives good tidings that Jesus, son of Mary, will come again before end of times. Because what we believe as Muslims, in the last moment of Jesus, right, some people, they tried to kill him, but they couldn't. That's how we believe, that's how Quran narrates. God elevated him to the heavens, so he lives in different dimension of life. He's not dead, still alive, and he will come back to complete his mission. What is his mission? Provide justice, bring essential values such as love, mercy, compassion, and people are treated equally, and spirituality prevails. And in this mission, Muslims and Christians, they will be together. That's what we believe as Muslims. So we'll come back and set the things right and provide justice and make the essential values prevail again. So that's why I am deeply involved in interfaith dialogue, because that's something I think common between us. As Muslims, Jesus is one of the 5 greatest prophets. That if any Muslim, he doesn't believe in Jesus, that makes him out of Islam. So we have to, it's part of our belief system. We have to believe all the prophets mentioned in the Quran. And Jesus especially, there's a very special connection between Jesus and Prophet Muhammad. And one, he gave Jesus, during his lifetime, he gave good tidings that there will be prophet after me, even gave his name as Ahmed. Ahmed is another name of Muhammad. And Prophet Muhammad gave good tidings that Jesus will come again to complete his mission. That's the connection between them. But unfortunately, the followers of Christianity and Islam, too much misunderstanding, too much sometimes hatred, unnecessary enmity. So it's our duty to finish such enmity and promote the interfaith dialogue of peace, love among all people.